I think we Methodists like to have our ducks in a row, kind of in our DNA. Our founder, John Wesley, was famous for his orders and his instructions and his structure and his discipline and accountability. And so we like our structure, we like our order. In 1 Corinthians 14, the Apostle Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, and Corinth was famous for its excesses, and that had seeped into the life of the church. And when it came to spiritual gifts, the Corinthian church had got carried away and with things like speaking in tongues. And so Paul wanted to see a more measured, a more balanced perspective. So he gently, to teach them about how to manage these spiritual gifts, he demonstrates to them, he sets an example for them, and he says to them, when I pray, I will pray with the Spirit. So he used the spiritual gifts, but I will pray with the mind also. He says, I will sing praise with the Spirit, but I will sing praise with the mind also. It's this lovely sense of balance, of blend of spirit and mind. And then in Ephesians 6:18, Paul says to that church, he instructs them, he says to them, pray in the Spirit at all times and on every occasion. Pray in the Spirit at all times and on every occasion. Now, as I said, I think we Methodists like our things in order. So when it comes to praying with our mind, I think we can get into that. I think we can resound with that. We can go, I'm in with that. But when it comes to praying with the Spirit, I think we're a little more cautious. We're a little more uncertain about what that means. We've been on a journey as a church looking at a beginner's guide to prayer, and I thought before we finished, we had to speak a little bit about what it means to pray in the Spirit and to pray with the Spirit. So what I thought I would do is I would get hold of 3 friends who come out of different contexts and ask them if they could tell us how they understood those phrases, what they understood those phrases to mean. So my first guest today is Alexander Venter. He comes from the Vineyard movement, the Vineyard Church. He's been a wonderful teacher and speaker on prayer and on spirituality. He's the author of a number of books. In fact, he's busy working on a 2nd volume of Praying with the Psalms. And so he's our first guest today. Our second guest today is Vusi Vilakati. Vusi recently received his doctorate in leadership. He's the minister of the Bethesda Methodist Mission in Johannesburg. And I asked Vusi if he would speak to us a bit about praying in the Spirit, praying with the Spirit, from a particularly African context. And then I asked my friend Trevor Hudson, who also has been a teacher over many years of spirituality and prayer, the author, again, of a number of popular and much used books, very helpful books, if he would give us a word too about how he understood what it means to pray with the Spirit and in the Spirit. For each of my guests, I said to them, I just want top of the mind, top of the head thoughts, and just a couple of minutes. And so I hope you'll find them helpful. So here's Alexander. It's so good to have Alexander Venter with us. Alexander is a friend of Newton Park's, and he's been a friend of mine for a number of years. He comes from the Vineyard movement. And Alexander, we've been dealing with prayer over a number of weeks now. And for our last week, we are considering Paul's words about praying with the mind and praying with the Spirit, also singing with the mind and singing with the Spirit also. And I wondered, from your context, what do you understand by Paul's reference to praying with the mind and praying with the Spirit, particularly the praying with the Spirit part and singing with the Spirit? What does he mean, do you think?
Okay, well, thanks, Rowan, for asking the question and including me. I think in the context that Paul uses it, specifically in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, he's referring to praying in other languages by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So classically called praying in tongues or glossolalia, speaking ecstatically in prayer or praise to God is praying by your spirit as opposed to praying by your mind. So I would understand Paul's usage of the contrast between praying with the mind, that's in the language that's known to you, English in our case, where as you're talking to God in English, you're thinking in your mind about what you're saying to God. In contrast, praying in tongues is the ecstasy, ecstatic prayer that comes directly from your spirit, that is in different languages you've not learned, and therefore it transcends or bypasses your mind, and it's directly from the Holy Spirit in your spirit, talking mysteries to God, mysteries of prayer and praise and intercession. And I think you could include Romans 8 in that, where Paul talks about the agony of the Spirit praying through us with groanings that cannot be articulated in our normal language, as it were. It's not only that, but I think it includes that. I'd add one further category. I think that Paul, when he says praying in the Spirit, in the book of Jude, at least Jude speaks about that, and there are other places where Paul says praying in the Spirit. Ephesians chapter 6, as an example, verse 18. I think he's referring to praying from the heart, spontaneously, without the sense of mind control or rationalizing, logically talking to God, but just abandoning yourself from your heart's spirit in crying out to God with praises and praise that can also therefore be in English, but it's not of the same order of rational engagement, articulating logically to God what you would normally do. But it's just this overflow from the heart spirit that can also therefore be in English inspired praise by the Holy Spirit that is not logically worked out, as it were, or rationally controlled, but just is in spirit inspired prophetic prayer. I would also include that in my understanding when Paul says praying with your spirit or praying in the Spirit. And small s, human spirit, capital S, God's Spirit, and the union of those spirits, because Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17, that the person that is joined to the Lord is one spirit with God. Capital S and small s, we become one spirit with God. So that's what my understanding would be, Rowan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Just to say, we are Methodists, so we sometimes get a bit freaked out by the idea of speaking in tongues. So the second part of your answer would be very encouraging for some of us.
Okay.
Thank you for your time today.
Pleasure.
It was wonderful to also have the voice of my friend and colleague, Vusi Vilakati, who serves at Bethesda Methodist Mission in Johannesburg. Vusi, thank you for being with us this evening. We're asking ourselves the question this Sunday, what does it mean to pray in the Spirit? And I wondered if you had some thoughts on that idea, on what it means to pray in the Spirit.
Oh, my friend, thank you for the opportunity, and greetings to you and the community that's gathered this weekend. It's a joy to just share a few thoughts. I have a number of things in my mind. As you asked me the question, my mind started floating to a number of things, and my mind often starts with the whole thing, trying to define what does it mean to pray in the Spirit. So I was caught with the concept in the Spirit for a bit, and the first thing that came is that when we think of being in the Spirit, and I thought we think of God as Trinity, it may mean something that you are fully immersed in the presence of God. I mean that for me, firstly, that you're praying in this place where you are fully in tune and in touch with the wave of God's presence within and around you. That could be the first thing in my mind. The second thing that comes out of the same would be that you are connected to that reality of who you perceive and understand God to be in that moment of your life. And that also is connected to your own life story and the life stories of those that journey with you. Often in the African sense is that when you are in the Spirit, it's a place of connecting reality. You're connecting with those that have gone before you. You're connecting with the faith of your ancestors. you're connecting with the faith of those that are in the community. So oftentimes in the African sense, the Spirit would be invoked in a number of ways. The invoking of the Spirit, and in some case, it is that moment when you are singing and dancing and excited and exuberant in the midst of song and excitement and all of that. So the Spirit in most of those, in the African culture, sometimes it speaks in those loud moments.
Yeah.
There are sometimes when the Spirit speaks, when the drums and the noise and the silence and the singing and the clapping and the dancing quietens, then you hear that sense of connection with the trees and the wind and the mountains and everything around you. A sense of deep connection with self and reality and people around you. And in that moment, I would say you are deeply embedded in the life of the Spirit.
Yeah.
So then the Spirit often then would be, if you were to look at that definition, you would say it means that you are praying by the means of the Spirit. You are assisted to give expression to the language of your heart, to the language of your faith, and the language of what's happening around you. You are enabled to name and hold before God in that way. It is also being helped by this sense of God's overwhelming presence to give expression to your love for God and love for the world. And it is also a place where you do two things. Most African spirituality does two things in the realm of the Spirit. You banish you banish evil, you name and you exercise the evil things. And on the other hand, you call the good out of people and from God and from reality, and name it and pray for it to come into being. All of these things are assumed to be happening in the realm of the power and the presence of the Spirit. I hope that helps. There's just a few thoughts that came to mind as you asked me the question.
That's fantastic. Thank you. It's wonderfully, wonderfully diverse. And I'm very grateful for your reflection. I feel like I could talk to you much more about it, but we're keeping this short today. So thank you, Vusi, so much for taking time. And your reflection, particularly on African spirituality, is especially helpful for us today. Bless you.
Thank you for the blessing of this time, and blessings to you and your community. Thank you.
I'm so grateful to have my friend Trevor Hudson with us today as well, another voice. And Trevor, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to speak with us briefly. We're looking at this theme of praying with the mind and praying with the Spirit also. So I wonder if I could just ask you your sense of what it means to pray with or in the Spirit.
Oh, lovely to be with you, Ryan, and with your people. Thank you for the invite. And thank you for that question. I think the one phrase that just comes to my mind that means so much to me is the phrase mutual indwelling, which is a massive phrase, but I think it just means that, like Paul says in Romans 8, the Holy Spirit is in our hearts and praying. With groans that are too deep for words. And I just love that, because it says that whether I know it or not, there's a prayer meeting going on in 24/7. This is not something I've got to do. This is something that the Spirit is doing in my heart, even right now in your heart, in our hearts, in the life of the church. The Spirit is within us, calling out to God. So that's that part of the equation. On the other side of the dwelling is we also dwell in the Spirit, and our life is in the Spirit, and our prayer is in the Spirit. So it's like this mutual indwelling of the Trinity living in us and us living in the Trinity. And so if you were to say to me, okay, Trevor, get practical now, the word that comes to my mind, and it just means so much to me, is that I just need to have moments in my life where I inhabit this mutual indwelling, where I just very quietly and consciously and silently make myself available to this wonderful reality of the Spirit living in me and me living in the Spirit praying in me and me praying in the Spirit. So for me, it's going on all the time, but I find that I just need set aside moments of just living into this reality in the silence as deeply as I can.
Thank you. Can I ask you, we haven't prepared you for this question, but to say, is there a practical thing I can do if I'm not experienced in doing this kind of thing, and I put aside a few minutes in a day? How do I kick that? How do I kick that off? What do I do?
Yeah. I think, there's that beautiful verse in Galatians where Paul says that God sends the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, not into our heads, into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So my practical suggestion is to be quiet and to let the Spirit help us say, Abba, Father. And in saying Abba, Father, know that we are Abba's child and Abba's beloved. And that is what it means for me most deeply to pray in the Spirit and to let the Spirit pray in me. It deepens it gives me this profound assurance, Abba, and me being Abba's child or beloved child.
Thank you so much for your word. God bless you in the work you do.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah.